Well, welcome everyone. I am Dr. Janett Naylor. I'm a member of the psychology department, and I've been asked today to provide you some tips on how to put together posters. Typically these tips have come from things that I've accidentally done or have been at conferences and other people accidentally did. I've also done just a little bit of research on some best practices and things like that. So I have a handout for you before you go of just some general best practices. But this is really, for me, just an informal talk to provide you a little bit of information about how to construct a poster. And then I'll have some time for questions and answers if you guys have any questions. But if you do, just feel free to speak up anytime during the presentation as well. Okay, so one of the big things that I notice about people when they put together posters is that they're not aware of who their audience is. So take into account things like, is this a small level conference? Is this a regional conference? Or is this a very national or international conference? The audience at each one of those conferences is going to be very different. So if you're presenting at a student-friendly or a student-level type of conference, your wording or your jargon that you use may have to be limited. But if you're going to present at a very large international or national conference, do expect your audience to be familiar with all of the words that you use in your field. As psychologists, we have a very jargon-heavy field, and I would assume this is true for other fields as well. So when we go to a very large conference, like a national American Psychological Conference, we have a little bit more freedom to use those big jargon terms. But if we're going to present at something more at the state level, or we're going to be mainly presenting to undergrads, then we really need to change those terms. So instead of using the big fancy term that kind of sums up an entire concept, maybe you want to be a little bit more lenient with the terms that you're using. The other thing that you need to take into account is, what do they need to know to understand your poster? So if you're doing something on a very, very narrow topic, you may want to provide them with general background as just a small paragraph on your poster that describes some terms or things like that. But if they need to have a special set of knowledge or skills in order to understand your poster, unfortunately people are just going to walk by and they're not going to pick up the information that you need. So if you did a fancy statistical analysis, or you're using some sort of computer or some sort of mechanism that is new to your discipline, you may want to provide them with a picture of that apparatus or a definition or explanation of what that apparatus does, so that it'll help your audience understand what you did. You also need to think about what is their level of understanding. Sometimes we present at interdisciplinary conferences, especially, I can give you some psychology examples. A lot of times we will present at conferences that involve teachers and parents and people from the general community. So for example, as a developmentalist, I often present at conferences that are specific to children. And we get a lot of parents, we get community advocates, as well as doctors, lawyers, and things like that at these conferences. So we need to take into account what is their understanding of the field in general. And sometimes at interdisciplinary conferences, we run into this problem. So we need to think about, what is your audience coming into your poster session with? Then the other thing that I commonly see is people try to do way too much on one poster. Right? We know that when we design studies, or we do research or creative activities, we have multiple goals. Right? We don't just design one little project that looks at one tiny little set of ideas or one little creative activity. A lot of times we look at a whole scope of activities. And what we can do is we can produce posters that are designed for a narrow focus, because we don't want to overwhelm our audience with so much information, everything that you did on the project, because they won't take away what's important in that message. So think about, what is the one thing that you want your poster to say to the audience? Right? So you can do multiple ones, and this isn't cheating in our field. So a lot of times we will do a very large research project that may take years for us to collect the data, but we can get 7, 8 posters out of it because we narrow it down into one specific set of analyses or one specific part of the methodology. So your poster doesn't have to do everything. You just kind of pick out what's the high point and what do you want your audience to learn from your poster. Okay, a good poster, unfortunately, needs to be eye-catching. Or fortunately, however, if you see it as a creative endeavor, as I do, it's fortunately. If you're not that creative and you don't like the artsy part of it, then it's unfortunately. But a lot of times when you're presenting posters, you're going to be in a room with anywhere from 20 to hundreds of posters. I've presented at conferences where I was in a room a little bit bigger than this that had maybe 20 posters in it, so it was a very intimate poster setting. I've also presented at conferences where the poster sessions were held in a very large gymnasium type room, where I was one of hundreds of posters. So keep in mind how big this might be, and if your audience a lot of times will wander up and down the rows of the posters, and if you want them to stop and look at your poster, you have to do something that's eye-catching. You have to get them to stop and look at your poster, right? So once they stop, then we need to get them to read it, right? So they may find something really eye-catching, whether it be color or pictures or graphs, but unfortunately, once we get them to stop, we have to get them then to take the time to actually read over the poster. So we need it to be well organized. We know, just from walking through, right? So your poster is probably going to be about this high or so, and you want people to walk past and look at them. So put the important information at the top. Make your title really, really big so that they can see, all right, this is what I want to look at. This is what this study is about. Maybe put some important information about what was the goal or the aim of your study at the top so that they can just skim it very quickly and then decide whether they want to stop and read the entire poster. The other thing to think about is that you want to organize this into areas within your field. So for psychology, we typically organize our papers into an intro, method, results, and discussion. Other fields do this differently, but if in psychology, we would divide our poster then into the introduction, the method, the results, and the discussion, because it follows our pattern of organization of our manuscripts. So if you're in other fields, you might want to think about how this is done. Do you have a general introduction to your paper and then have some specific facts or content and then a conclusion? So think about how your field organizes its manuscripts and then organize your poster in that way so that your audience is used to going through manuscripts and reading them in journals. They can transfer that information to your poster very quickly, and they can look for the information that is specific to them. The other thing that I see a lot of people do is their poster, while it looks really, really pretty, the font is so tiny that people have to stand very close. You want someone to be able to read your poster from a 2 or 3 foot reading. Like, you want to be able to, so if this is my poster, you want them to be able to read it from about here comfortably. Also think about if this is going to be a very crowded room, you don't want people to have to be really, really close to your poster to see it, because if there's, let's hope it's popular, and you have a lot of people standing around reading your poster, you want them to be able to see it from a distance so that they don't have to get up really close to read your text. The other thing that a lot of people do is they put way too many words on a poster. I know, I can't believe I'm saying this, way too many words on a poster, right? It's about being succinct, right? It's about bullet points. It's about providing information. You don't have to do it in the most eloquent manner. You just need to spit out the relevant information, right? So I know a lot of students sometimes will try and just copy and paste their paper or their manuscript onto a poster, and that's not really how it works. While you could use that as a foundation, what I would do is make it short, make it sweet, and get the point across. And also think about just as you're walking by, sometimes you really just don't want to stand there for 10 minutes reading somebody's poster. You know, you want it to be short and sweet and right to the point. Okay, so basic format, I do all of my posters in PowerPoint. There are other programs for this, but I do all of mine in PowerPoint. So I'm just going to give you some basics of how to make one of these big posters in PowerPoint. Essentially what you do is you just start out, it all goes on one slide. So in PowerPoint, you know, you can add multiple slides and things like that, but this all goes onto one slide. And what you do is you change your page setup to fit the size of the poster that you wanted. So if your conference has specifications for a poster that's 30 by 40 or 36 by 48, you can change the PowerPoint so that the poster that you print will be 30 by 40 or 36 by 48, whatever your conference says. So change the page setup to fit whatever requirements you have. Then you can format the background. You can use some preloaded types of things. There are templates out on the web if you want to do that. Or if you're a little bit more creative, you can use text boxes and shapes and word art and all of those types of things in PowerPoint. I find this to be the fun part. So I like to create mine from scratch. I start with just a blank PowerPoint page, and then I add in sort of the fun colorings and all that kind of stuff. There is an option in PowerPoint for you to add grid lines to that page so that you can make sure things are lined up. Because think about if it's tiny on your screen, when you blow it up to 3 feet by 4 feet, if something's off 2 centimeters, you're going to see it when it's 3 feet by 4 feet. It may not be obvious when you put it on the slide, but when you get it blown up to its full size, you're going to see some problems. Right, so you make sure you can add these grid lines. The other things you can do is there's ways in PowerPoint to make sure that all your boxes are the same width and height, and you can do all of that under formatting in your text boxes, and I can show you how to do that if you need specifics. But there are great ways to build in that make sure all, you know, if you're going to put a header on it, make sure the header is the same width as the text box and things like that. But again, there are templates out there if you don't like the creative part. There are templates that you just basically copy and paste your information into PowerPoint. I have found it difficult to actually type text into the PowerPoint because it is 30 by 40. It's so large. So when you're trying to get all the text in there, it's itty bitty tiny on the screen. So what I do is I typically open either another PowerPoint or Word and just type my document out in Word and then copy and paste that into PowerPoint. It's a lot easier than trying to get it all into PowerPoint at that point in time. So once you get good at these, you could probably put together one of these posters in 20 minutes, half hour, once you get sort of these little tricks and stuff down. So that's really all I have as far as guides and things like that. The rest is just a bunch of examples that I've pulled from projects that I've done. This one is kind of self-created. I picked a color scheme and went with it. This one, you can see the boxes are a little bit bigger. Nothing really lines up exactly. Like I don't have everything in set columns. It's because I wanted to highlight specific types of information at different times. So the big point here was we wanted to present suicide rates across the Midwest and the American Indian population. And we can track. The idea here is essentially that those states that have more non-traditional reservation types of systems, so like Oklahoma does not have a traditional reservation for American Indians. They are separated by counties rather than something like South Dakota where they actually have land reservations. So we wanted to highlight here the idea that it seems like those states where American Indian cultures are more integrated into the overall state, so they live in more of a county system, actually have lower suicide rates than those who exclude or segregate the American Indian population. So we wanted to highlight some of that, so we paid attention to the discussion and our graphs and things like that. That's what we really wanted to highlight. This one is a little bit more traditional. It was presented at a very large child development conference. So I was thinking about the audience and the type of information that they would want to know. And at child development conferences, they are very into methodology. They want to know what you coded, what you saw, what you did, how you analyzed it. So you can see a lot of the poster, the main sections here focus on results and methodology because that was the type of conference that I was at. They're very into how did you analyze this, what did you see? So by knowing my audience in that manner, I was able to put the main points there in the center, and the introduction and discussion were a little bit more general because my audience would have been experts in the field. This one focused on a statistical procedure. So you can see a majority of the poster is the results section and the subsequent tables that followed. So because this was a statistical analysis and something new in the field, majority of the poster was focused on that type of, providing that type of information. Let's see. The next couple ones are just examples of how you can take one really, really large research project and get a whole bunch of posters out of it. A colleague and I spent several years collecting data from forensic patients. And we got so much information, everything from surveys and questionnaires to medical history and what types of psychotropic drugs they were taking and all of these types of things. So there are several posters here that we are able to focus on a specific aspect of that project, and we were able to get, I think, 5 or 6 different presentations out of this one specific research project. So the next couple here all focus on the same idea. I just wanted to show you sort of ways to pin down or narrow down your information and sort of capitalize on all of the work that you do to collect this data. So this one is on aggression and self-esteem in those forensic patients. This one is on consistency between staff perception of aggression and the participants' perception of aggression. And whether those were consistent. So were the people who were working at the facility seeing the women as aggressive as the women were seeing themselves? No, they weren't. It's a short version of that one. This one then is the relationship, kind of linking back to one of the first projects, as we look at self-esteem and aggression levels. And what we were interested in is incident reports when they were at a facility they record every time a person does something that they see as remotely aggressive. So do those reported incidences of aggression actually map onto what really occurred at the facility? So when they had to fill out incident reports and things like that. So again, monopolizing or capitalizing, I guess I should say, on the idea that we spent years doing this project, we're going to get all the bang for our buck on this one. So this is a separate project. This one is on teacher evaluation. And again, you can kind of see this is just divided into intro, method, results, discussion. This is kind of standard for our field. And then finally, this one is a non-research based poster. So this one might be a little bit more applicable for the humanities or something like that. This is just providing information on how to use technology in the classroom, technology in the department, and technology in research. So it's more of an informative one rather than an actual research-based presentation. So, do you guys have questions, comments, concerns? Yes?
In your earlier examples, I'm just curious, I saw male-female friendships and then a separate graph for female-male friendships. What's the difference?
Okay. So this example where it's male-male friendships, this is males reporting on a male friend. So in male-female, it's males reporting on a female friend, and then female-female are females reporting on a female friend, and female-male are females reporting on a male friend. So it was all from one person's perception of that friendship. So we had our participants, as a female, I would provide information about my closest male friend and my closest female friend. And that, interestingly, that turns out to be different than the female male and the male female seem to be structured differently. It's about the perception of the person reporting.
Okay.
Interesting, yeah. Yes?
In your earlier slide about the suicides, I was curious.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do Utah in there?
No, we did not. We stuck to the Central Plains. So it went from North Dakota to Texas.
Okay. I was just curious.
There is analyses, and these results come from the CDC. We have that information, but we were focused mainly on that central region because it is so distinct between the reservations that are in North Dakota and South Dakota and the reservations that are a little bit further in the south.
And I also want to ask, having to actually do a presentation,
Mm-hmm.
if you've never been to a conference before,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to know the way that your discipline in particular would organize this information, how do you recommend finding that out?
I think the best advice I could give you is talk to a mentor. I mean, go to a prominent person in your field who has gone to these types of conferences before and have them just provide you with a general understanding of what goes on at these types of conferences, because even within our field, the conferences are very, very different. Typically, the larger the conference, the more prestigious it is. So something that's more of a national or international conference is going to be requiring a lot more details than some of the more state or regional types of conferences. So my best advice for you would be to just find a mentor in your field. If that doesn't work, then I try to encourage my students as much as possible to attend a conference before they go to present at a conference, because I think when you go to your first conference, it's a little overwhelming. For those of you who've been to conferences, it can be overwhelming. So much information is given to you at one point in time that I know I've left conferences and I just feel like my brain is full and I think information is just falling out of my ears and I can't keep it all in there. So the best advice that I would give you would be to attend a conference first and just kind of get the feel for what type of things are going on in your field. And a lot of times this might even just, for students, might be a local type of thing. There are a lot of fields will have conferences that are geared more towards students, and this is a great place for students to practice. Basically, it's a very friendly environment, and it'll also give you a chance to go to something locally. So check out something that's close by, maybe in the next state, and just visit first before you jump in. Yeah, you're welcome. Yes?
Earlier you talked about tailoring the information you present and how you present it to your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a case where you might expect that a certain percentage of your audience simply will not be able to get the information? For instance, if it was a display that was open to the general public and you had something that was, by its very nature, it had to be a little bit jargon heavy, would you just expect that certain people wouldn't get it?
I would what I try to do is read the body language of the person that's coming up to my poster. If they kind of look a little lost or, really kind of overwhelmed with all of the information, I ask them, would you like me to just provide you a summary? And then I can kind of tailor the talk to sort of how much I can see their understanding. So if I start out and I'm using jargon and they're kind of like, what? And I can, okay, back off a little bit more, let's explain some of this. And I know, from my experiences, people really appreciate a really succinct summary. So even if they walk up, they might look at you, make eye contact. The best way, I think, to judge if somebody wants to stand there is don't make eye contact with you. If they make eye contact with you, they probably want a summary. They probably just want tell me the take-home message here. Other times people will walk up and they'll be very intent on your poster and they won't make eye contact until after they've read it. And I would assume, and maybe it's just my assumption, but I would assume the person who stands there and reads the entire poster is probably more comfortable with the jargon in the field than a person who walks up and makes eye contact right away and wants that type of summary. So it is difficult in those sort of open types of conferences to figure out, are they understanding, are they not understanding? But a lot of times if you just make eye contact, you smile, you offer them, would you like me to provide you with a summary, or do you have any questions, just some sort of friendly things like that. A lot of times they will basically ask, I don't understand what that is, or what did you do here? And you can provide them with that information. The other thing that you can do, and it's really up to the researcher, you can either provide them with a handout. You can print these off, obviously not in the 30 by 40 size, because that would get rather expensive. But you can print them off. You can adjust them so that it'll be on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and you can use them as handouts. The other thing that I have done is because I've run into, I've made 60 handouts and 4 people stopped by my poster and now I have all these handouts I don't know what to do with. The other thing that is very common is to provide a list for them to put their email on, and you can send them a PDF of the poster. That also leads into, these posters are easier to print if you transfer them and save them as a PDF than if you save them as a PowerPoint document. So a lot of times, especially the print shop here on campus, will want this as a PDF not necessarily as a PowerPoint. Because we also know that sometimes when we open PowerPoint on different computers and things like that, oddly things move around. I don't know if you guys have ever witnessed that, but sometimes things will be there or not be there. So if you save it as a PowerPoint, it kind of locks in your formatting, and it's easier for the print shop to do.
We had a presentation in class recently where the guy had a bunch of pictures that were very, very helpful to the understanding of the presentation, and that particular version wouldn't open any of his pictures.
Yes, so PDF, I think that's one of the best things I can tell you is PDF it. And we know that, that PowerPoint will save as PDF. It's an option that the new versions of PowerPoint will do. If not, there are programs out there that will convert things to PDF. Yes?
So I'm gathering that if you have a poster you're presenting, then generally you are going to stand there with it.
Yes, typically that is expected. That's a very good question. Typically it is expected that you stand there with it the entire time, or one of the researchers stands there with it the entire time. At larger conferences, that could mean 2.5 hours that you're standing there. But in the gymnasium-sized conference that I presented at, the poster session lasted about 2 hours. And it was just because to give everybody time to get through all of the posters, you had to have that. And in smaller ones, you might be there an hour, maybe hour and a half. But yes, it is expected that you stand there the entire time. Some other things, cost might be something that you guys are interested in. How much do these things cost to print? The more color, the larger the poster, the more expensive it's going to be to print. So I can tell you, just to give you some examples here, this one costs about $30 to print, and it was 30 by 40. I know that just because I got the bill for it the other day. And the print shop does these. This one and this one were about the same price. They were about $30 each. So the more color you add, the more expensive it's going to be. So this poster was a lot more expensive. I think this one was about $45 to print because it had a lot more color and a lot more detail on it than some of the other ones. So take that into consideration when you're coming up with all these great creative things to do on your posters and you want to add a lot of color and detail and all of that. That's really great. It looks pretty, but it adds a lot to your expense. One of the easiest ways to cut back on poster expenses is a white background. Add color specifically to targeted areas. Graphs, pictures, things like that. Students get very excited about putting like a light blue background behind all their words. That's cost. You're adding money to the poster by adding the light blue background. It looks very pretty, but really think about it, is it essential to the poster? Yes?
Yes, definitely would encourage you, unless you, with your opportunity to go this scholarly and creative activities week here, you'll see a lot of good and bad examples. And one thing I know, because I've been judging these posters for I don't know how many years now, for SICOP, is that sometimes students will put a picture as their background of maybe an animal they're studying if they're in biology, or a picture from a book of literature or something like that. And it looks really good on the PowerPoint, but then when you print it, then you can't read the text, or it's too cluttered looking. So keep in mind that although it may look good on your computer screen, it may not look good printed, because sometimes what happens is all you see is that background design, and it makes it very, very difficult to read the text.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, maybe do a test print on a smaller sheet of paper and see what it looks like in 8.5 by 11, and then kind of think about, do I really want to go to the expense of printing a picture or a dark design behind the text, because it may not come out looking as good as you think it will.
And I think actually the poster that I have up right now is a really great example of that. It looks very, very pretty on a small scale because you can actually read what's contained in these little boxes. But on this large scale, you can't. So I think this is a great example of it looked really pretty. And it did work on a 3-foot by 4-foot size, but you can see just as extending it out to this, the color wasn't as successful as I would have hoped. So, example of what not to do. We all make mistakes. It all happens.
Pictures up to that size, does the resolution also come into play?
Yes.
Like, you have a huge photograph, and then you can see individual pixels, and it just doesn't look great quality.
Yes. That happens too with color. So sometimes when you fill in a box or you shade a box or something, things like that, it does look pixelated when it's blown up to those types of sizes. And you can also see, I mean, little things, every tiny little mistake, you know, so the spacing between these two paragraphs might be different. So the spacing isn't over here, types of things. You won't see all of those tiny little mistakes until it's huge. So you really want to spend the time editing them and printing them out in those smaller sizes and just getting in there and making sure everything lines up and is as pretty as you would like. Now, a lot of times, you probably didn't notice that that one had spaces, this one had spaces and that one didn't, but it's your poster. And when you hang it up, and I've done this, when you hang it up, you're like, oh, I can't believe that's not lined up. And nobody else sees it, but to you, it's the glaring error that stands out to you. So the more time that you take in lining things up and making sure things are presented in the way that you want, the better off this will be for you. And also give the print shop a lot of time to print these. It takes at least a week to print them, especially if it has a lot of color, because it'll need to dry and then it'll need to be cut down and things like that. So it could take several days for it to dry before they feel comfortable cutting it down and things like that. So work ahead. I think that's the best advice. Some of the best advice I can give you, work ahead, because the people over in the print shop are wonderfully helpful people. But like everybody else, they're very busy. And there are certain times at conferences that the print shop gets extremely busy. So the psychology department last week or so went to a conference, and 7 of the 9 faculty went. And we had students and so forth. I think the print shop might have printed 20 posters for us. So give them plenty of time to get them in there. And they'll ask for, when do you want this back? How large do you want it? Do you want it matte finish? Do you want it glossy finish? And if you do it glossy, it's going to be more expensive than if you do a matte finish and things like that. So definitely keep price in mind. Yes?
Just another comment again from judging. Check your spelling.
Oh, yeah.
One time there was a poster I saw once upon a time where the title was misspelled. There was a word in the title. So it's bad enough when you have something misspelled when it's in a 12 font, but imagine it in a 48 or 64 font that's just screaming to the whole world that you didn't check your work, or that you don't care, or it's very non-professional looking. And
You paid $30 to print this thing.
or more. And so, please use your spell checker. Or if you're not very good at catching errors in print, have somebody else look at it, because I'll see it. So before you spend $30, $40 on getting something printed and having it hanging up there where hundreds of people will see it with that error, do some preventive maintenance and have somebody else look at it. That's isn't pretty.
No, and that's something, I've been doing these large-scale posters, 12, 15 years now. I still have somebody look over it. Don't be afraid to just print it out. I give it to my graduate students. I give it to my undergrads to look at. Just a whole new set of eyes. It'll make it a lot better. So I'll have the colleague look at it. So there's a whole bunch of people. Some of these are students listed on it. I had all of them check it over. Because their name is on it, you want to make sure that they've approved the layout and the look of it as well. So have your mentor look at it, have your fellow authors look at it, have friends look at it, just to get some of these typos or spacing or things like that. Even have them read it, because sometimes what makes sense to you, because you're so ingrained in the project, may not make sense to someone else. So definitely have people not involved in your research project at the time read it over, because it'll help, because they're the audience you're looking at. So, I had some people who were not involved in this research project look it over to make sure that they understand what we did and what we found and so forth. So someone who doesn't know about the project, have them look it over, because that's your audience. Someone in your field, look it over, because that's who you want to be able to understand it. Anything else? Okay. Well, I really appreciate you guys. Even the questions about the research, that was fun. It was like giving these posters all over again. So, but if you guys want more specifics later, I can provide you with some information. But thanks for coming.